Hereby, I open this academic ceremony in which Tuğçe Varol will defend the academic thesis Just in Time, Applying Behavioral Science to Create a Safe University Environment in Times of the COVID-19 Pandemic. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis?
Thank you. Dear Prorector, dear members of Corona, dear family, friends, and colleagues, thank you for joining me on this special date. In the next 15 minutes, I will provide you a summary of my PhD dissertation. Recently, the World Health Organization declared the end of the international public health emergency state of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we actually transitioned into a new phase in the pandemic. Therefore, I would like to ask you to go back in time and remember the first 2 years of the pandemic, because the decisions we made, the studies we conducted, the topics we addressed, and then the interventions we developed, they were all heavily influenced by the context and then the timeline of the pandemic. Firstly, I will discuss some important dates and then the rationale behind initiating this project. In 2019, the first official COVID-19 case was identified in China. In February 2020, the Netherlands recorded its first official COVID-19 case. Within a month, in March 2020, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic. And shortly after, the Dutch government decided to implement the first lockdown, which led to the closures of cafes, restaurants, all non-essential stores, also schools and universities. During this period, the Maastricht University board decided to swiftly transition to fully online education. In September 2020, in the summer of 2020, the measures were eased, so this allowed the university to open the doors to their students. So Maastricht University board prepared for the new academic year to welcome all their students to campus. In the meantime, the Maastricht University board also requested support from our team to help them in their decision-making processes. Therefore, our team decided to provide theory and evidence-based information to the board to help them when tackling the COVID-19 pandemic, also create a safe environment for students, also the employees. Our project had 3 main focuses, and the first one was adherence to COVID-19 regulations. In September 2020, with the start of the new academic year, the Maastricht University board opted for a hybrid education system, which means both online and on-site education. This allows students to come to university, but they had to follow certain regulations. So, for instance, keeping distance, testing and isolating when having symptoms. From September 2020 till December 2020, our focus was on adherence to COVID-19 regulations of students. So we wanted to develop a program to increase adherence to COVID-19 regulations of students. But in order to do that, we first needed to understand what to change. Therefore, we conducted 2 studies. The first study was focus group interviews. In the first study, we talked to students about COVID-19 regulations of the university, their adherence. Also, we want to explore certain barriers and facilitators of their behavior. In the second study, we wanted to select targets for our programs. The topics covered in these 2 studies were COVID-19 regulations, specifically keeping distance, getting tested, and isolating. Based on these studies, in the first study, we identified a number of beliefs. You here see some examples. For instance, I am not afraid of contracting coronavirus, or COVID-19 regulations are irrelevant for our generation, or Maastricht University COVID-19 regulations are well organized. In the second study, we selected the most important beliefs, such as I am not afraid of contracting coronavirus. This is a risk perception beliefs. We made this selection based on the importance, so based on the relevance, also the changeability of beliefs. So we select the most important ones. Based on the findings of this study, we use behavior change methods, and we developed a Christmas and New Year message to provide a safe break to students. Just an example, as I said before, we identified the important belief, risk perception belief, I am not afraid of contracting coronavirus. We matched this with behavior change method, like scenario-based risk information and anticipated regret. And we translated this into messages. For instance, for the scenario-based risk information, we had two messages. Young people can transmit COVID-19 without experiencing any symptoms themselves. So even if you are young and think you are protected against the effects of COVID-19, you can still be a danger to others. Also, we use anticipated regret, and we formulated this message. Imagine how you would feel if someone else who is vulnerable were to become infected with COVID-19 because of you. After this, we moved our focus to COVID-19 vaccination. Because in January 2021, COVID-19 vaccines became available in the Netherlands. Also, the Dutch government started the Dutch vaccination campaign. So we wanted to provide information to students to help them in their decisions. For that, we had an online survey in March 2021 to understand students' willingness to get vaccinated, also the factors that influence their willingness. And we found that 80% of students were willing to get their vaccine when it's their turn. We also identified a number of factors that influence students' vaccination willingness, such as concerns. These are like side effects of the vaccines, long-term, also short-term side effects. Also, safety issues, also trust. So for instance, I am worried about the safety of COVID-19 vaccine. Also the risk perception, such as I think that without vaccination, I might be at risk of contracting COVID-19. And attitudes, these are positive or negative evaluations of the consequences of performing a behavior. For instance, I think that getting COVID-19 vaccine is a way out of this pandemic. And norms, these are the perceptions of what important others do, or whether we think that important others approve of our behavior. For instance, I think that most people who are important to me want me to get COVID-19 vaccine. Also, we identified self-efficacy as a factor that influences students' willingness. For instance, I am confident that before I decide to get COVID-19 vaccine, I will have sufficiently informed about the vaccination. Based on these findings, with the involvement of our university's communication department, we developed a vaccination webpage. In this webpage, we had information on COVID-19 vaccination, also frequently asked questions. Also, we developed a series of videos. In these videos, we had a student reporter who asked questions to the experts from our university. Experts respond to the students' question and also address all the identified factors in these videos. And this intervention went out before students were eligible to get the vaccine. So it was aimed to help in their decisions. Then we moved our focus to a safe return to Maastricht University, because in the summer of 2021, the vaccination uptakes was increased. Also, there was discussion to open up the society again. So we wanted to learn more about employees, so Maastricht University employees, safety feelings about returning to university. So we had interviews and online survey to learn more about if they feel safe, if they think that Maastricht University is a safe place to return to work. So what we found also that about 95% of employees were either vaccinated or they were willing to get the vaccination. Also, about 60% of employees reported that Maastricht University is a safe place to return to work in September 2021. There were some worries about meeting in large groups, also becoming infected. They also reported that there is a need for a transition period, so do not immediately start with the full-time work, because all these employees worked at home for 2 years, so they needed to get accustomed with the work environment. And then we had a webinar with Rector Magnificus, and one of our teammates presented the findings of our study. And Rector Magnificus addressed the concern of Maastricht University's employees, and also talked about the plans for the academic year, September 2021. Some concluding remarks. In times of crisis, it is very important to provide a timely response. For that, it is important to develop the trust relationship with stakeholders. For that, also identify these relevant stakeholders and involve them from the beginning. Also, working in parallel is very important to speed up the process. In times of crisis, it might be important to prioritize implementation over evaluation. And in order to create effective interventions, it's important to use theory, evidence, also intervention planning frameworks to have a systematic way to develop interventions. If there are not available literature, it is important to use available literature from the previous but relevant behaviors. Also, to help the society to open up again or deal with the pandemic, it is important to share the findings, also the data from our studies. Thank you. I give word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much for your presentation. The opposition will now be opened by Professor Jonas, Professor of Applied Social Psychology at Maastricht University. He will address his questions online, and he is chair of the assessment committee of this dissertation.
Thank you, Mrs. Prorector, for my time to ask questions. Esteemed candidate, I was very happy to be able to serve on this committee, and I really enjoyed reading your thesis, which I could sort of accompany a little bit on the fringes, seeing how you were doing this at the moment when the pandemic was still evolving and demanding the flexibility to adjust into many directions. I have some questions that are more global and are covering sort of the whole of your thesis, and I just wanted to reflect with you on this. So the context of your investigations are universities, but what I would like to hear your opinion on, or your idea of, is what actually are universities to you in this context, because they pose a certain psychological and also sociological framework, but I'm more interested in the psychological context. So are universities for you providers of normative frameworks with specific sanctioning rights or protective duties, or both? Or do you see them more as facilitators for individual adults and facilitating their decisions? But in that sense, they wouldn't be any different from any other actor in society. And how does that have an impact on the findings that you presented here?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for compliments and for your questions. First of all, about the universities, I do believe that universities are kind of small countries, because they also have governance, like the university boards, who are making decisions about students, also employees. And it is important to provide safety to their employees and students. That's why our project served in this pandemic content. And there are different questions, because when I compared universities to governments has more power. So they can actually enforce lockdowns, but it is for universities not very feasible to do that. They can follow government's decisions, but their decisions heavily based on the government. So they are, as I said, responsible to protect the safety, also the well-being of their students and also employees, because there are multiple topics, not only COVID-19 pandemic, but recently there are topics like sexual assault. These are addressed by the university board, because these are important topics for the students. They raise their voices also for the employees. So I think as a university, we have to act on students, also employees' needs. So it's also important to connect with these employees and students to learn more from them about the needs of these people, and then provide support to these students and employees.
Thank you for your answer. But if I may follow up now, you seem to have a sort of a maternal view of having protective duties, but how does that pan out for the different groups? Because now you kind of threw students and employees into one pot, while there are different sort of legal relations with these two groups, and what the university can do for one or not for the other is vastly different. And doesn't that increase the complexity and also require different type of approaches and interventions?
Again, I do agree with you that it's very complex because we are dealing with the very complex issues in the university as well. And so for our studies, we only targeted students and employees. We did not differentiate, like we did not have subgroups interventions. I think it might be important to differentiate these in the future programs, because we also saw that women feel more stress or experience more stress. Or for the first year students, for instance, since they come to university and they don't have any friends, they need to socialize more. For the first 3 months, with the lockdown, for the first 3 months, we had they had to follow the regulations, but they also mentioned that, for instance, first-year students specifically mentioned that it's very difficult for them to adhere to distancing rules because they have a need to socialize. So these specific groups needs more tailored approach. So I agree with that. Also for employees, it's completely different world, I think, because they have more power. Also, they are employed by the university. So students are paying to university, but employees are employed by the university. They have more, how to say that? So yeah, I agree. So we need more tailored interventions for different groups. So it's very complex. I agree with that. So this also requires a complex approach.
Okay, thank you very much. If I may ask a quick question towards the end, because you wanted to look at specific subgroups and differentiate this further. Are your findings specific to university students, or are they generalizable to young adults in general? And if yes or no, what would be the reasons? Is it the level of aspired education, being sort of in a limbo between half at home and half away? Could you elaborate on that a little bit more? Because I didn't find that much reflection on this in your thesis. Thank you.
Thank you again for the question, highly esteemed opponent. What we observed based on our findings, that what we found is very similar to what the public health group, so the RIVM group actually found, because when we check the results of their studies, these are very similar to the adult population, because when we talk also about the students, they are also adults. So our findings actually are also generalizable to other groups, but for the adherence to COVID-19 regulation, it's very specific to the university context, because we observed their adherence to universities' regulations, because also it's the environment they are bordered with. But for the vaccination and for other behaviors, it was our findings were very similar to the available literature.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The opposition will now be continued by Professor De Vries, Emeritus Professor of Health Promotion at Maastricht University, and he was also member of the Assessment Committee.
Yes, thank you. Well, let me first share some compliments because I was really impressed. I've been, well, a long time ago teaching a course on intervention mapping, and always the critique has been that it is too elaborate and not practical at all, and you can't use it, and it takes too much time and effort, etc., etc. And here we have a thesis that shows that indeed you can do this very quickly on a relevant topic that is really hot in the news, and with productivity as well. So all kinds of compliments for that. And after these congratulations, of course, we go into my hobbies. So I'll ask you some conceptual questions. Also in the presentation, you talked about anticipated regret, but it is anticipated regret about what you do to others, not about you yourself attracting COVID or whatever. So I think that's a very limited conceptualization of anticipated regret. So I'd like you to reflect on the role of anticipated regret in getting persons to be vaccinated themselves.
So for the highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliments and questions. For the anticipated regret, we use that for the adherence behavior as a behavior change method. And also why we use for the others, so the effect on the others or the consequences on others' health, because these are, we also saw that risk perception was low for these students. So if we would focus on students, this wouldn't probably lead to more effective approach, but what we saw in the literature as well, also the suggestions from this literature, that they suggest that for the young population, they do not like the regulations because they want to socialize. Also, they had hard times to follow the regulations because also, again, they want to socialize. Also, they see low risk. So that's why I think it is important to use anticipated regret in the sense that the consequences on others.
Yeah, I'd say in those circumstances, it is important to use anticipated regret to have people travel through time to a situation that maybe for them is not so vivid or salient at that moment, but that is exactly the process that anticipated regret evokes. That you think about the circumstances that are not yet there. Yeah. So, and this is of course also for young people, since they have a low risk perception, the risk perception might go up when you have them anticipate on future circumstances.
Yeah, that's very true, I think.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, let's do a follow-up study.
Okay, let's future studies.
I have to open up here again. There's another thing that has been well on my mind for quite a while, and this is I always give the example of my youngest son, who says, well, he doesn't take any protective measures for himself. He does it because this old guy is very vulnerable. So it is a responsibility towards others that makes him take preventive action. And I didn't see too much of that either in your thesis. Is that correct, or did you focus on this factor, the responsibility towards others?
We focus on this for the responsibility to others, for the I think for the vaccination, also for the adherence to behaviors, because as I said before, the risk. For the anticipated, for instance, for the message that I show, it was for the others.
In the message, it is, but in the vaccination study, it is not.
It is not. Okay.
And there's no anticipated regret there. There's no responsibility there. So you have a very limited psychosocial model for behavior in the vaccination study, I think. Oh, I'm sorry. It's just my northern way of doing things, being a bit direct maybe, but okay.
Yeah. I think then for the future studies we might need to focus on this.
Okay, that's a promise for the next.
Yes.
Then I still have time. Let's take a more technical issue, and this is about which beliefs to address and which to leave unaddressed. And you say, okay, this has to do with the room for improvement. And I gather, because you do those plots, the room for improvement is determined by the mean and by the standard deviation of the responses that people give. But I would like you to tell me what is now exactly the criterion that you use, because I see that if the mean is 6.6 on a 7-point scale, you don't take that item as a target for your intervention. But if it's 6.14 with about the same standard deviation, you do. And 6.14 on a 7-point scale, I'd say there's hardly any room for improvement. I mean, so what is the exact criterion that you use to determine which beliefs to address and which to leave unaddressed?
Thank you again for the question, highly esteemed opponent. While selecting the important beliefs, we focused on both mean and then the association with the intention. And for the means or the selection procedure, I think it also depends on the program that we want to develop, because also the groups that we are targeting, because we can include more more determinants or beliefs in the program, or less depending on the group or the program that we want to develop. So the category we stated in the thesis was based on our judgment. This might be different for other people, I do say so. But we try to facilitate the beliefs that we need to strengthen. Also, we wanted to select the beliefs that needs for improvement. So, yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, that does not really explain why you do take the 6.14 item, but anyway, so still time? Short. Oh, short. Okay. The next question would be about the attitude items that you use in the vaccination study, because I think most of them address positive effects of being vaccinated and not the negative effects. So vaccination might be a threat to my health. I mean, this is what the more populist factions in society has been telling us all the time. So the negative, the possibly negative effects, I think you omitted. Is that on purpose, or is there a reason for this?
Thank you again for the question, highly esteemed opponent.
You don't have to thank me every time.
Okay. So the selection we did, so the items we included in the study was based on the literature. So we did a literature review. Also based on the interviews we had with the students. So we developed a questionnaire and then we pilot tested. We also had interviews with students to learn more about their beliefs to include in the final survey. So this belief, so the positive, it depends on, it was based on the findings, so the available literature, but also the interviews we had with the students.
Well, my time is up, but in the focus group there are mostly believers and not so many disbelievers, and that is then a problem if you want to address a negative issue. So, but I thank you for your answers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Leurs, Head of Center for Health and Society at the Institute for Public Health and Environment in the Netherlands, better known as RIVM. She's with us online.
Thank you. Dear candidate, as head of the Corona Behavioral Unit at the time, core process and intervention mapping expertise was very welcome. We realized early in the pandemic that young adults were a vulnerable group we hadn't seen prior as a prime target group, and we needed to worry about them even more. Currently, we're drawing lessons from the pandemic, so your thesis is very welcome in adding the knowledge to this knowledge base. Now about your research. After the valid points made by Professor De Vries about anticipated regrets and willingness to protect others, which we have seen in different studies from our unit as well, I want to go with you to the invention you described in chapter 3 of your thesis. This was the message for Christmas and the New Year's break, which you based upon the qualitative and quantitative research you did. Now in intervention mapping, step 5 is the program implementation plan, and I presume the message was sent out. Step 6 is the evaluation plan. And I was wondering if you could elaborate upon the evaluation of this intervention. Did it take place, or how could you have evaluated it? Because we'd like to learn about the effectiveness of the message which was sent out.
Dear esteemed opponent, thank you for compliments and your questions. I do agree that we need to know the effectiveness of the program, so we need evaluation. But for our study, it was not really possible because when we do, actually, let's go back, and our initial plan was that we would had this studies in September and November, and we would develop the intervention, and we would have another studies to evaluate in the March of September, in March 2020. But it was not possible because we had another lockdown, so the university was closed, so we couldn't really evaluate this program. So it was actually, we were not planning to develop a Christmas or New Year message. It was what we did with the findings. We wanted to help students by using our findings of our study. So our initial plan was to have an evaluation in March, follow the actual steps of intervention mapping. But due to the ever-changing conditions and then the unpredictability of the pandemic, it was not possible to do that.
I know it wasn't possible, but could you elaborate a bit upon how could you evaluate the message which was sent out? Are there ways to say something about its effectiveness?
Yeah. So for the evaluation, we have both process and effect evaluation. For the process evaluation, it's more about the implementation or the reach. So we actually had an informal evaluation. So we gathered feedback from students, also from the parents actually, because it was about safe break during the Christmas. And for the effect evaluation, it was not really possible because we wouldn't really observe students' behavior even during the break because we couldn't get into their houses or the student houses to observe their behaviors.
Yeah, I understand. The thing, what we did is looking also more into qualitative research in talking about what really happened. And that may be something in future times where we have to think about how we deal with these issues in measuring and feeding back into the system. So there's something for future research and pandemic preparedness we have to take with us. But also looking back at it now during the pandemic, you explained also that the university was closed for students. It was online lessons currently, and it worked. Currently at the University of Maastricht, online participation is not allowed. And if people have medical problems and because of which they can't attend classes, they may fail a certain subjects. Do you think there's some lessons we could draw from the pandemic which could be still used now, or can you understand why not?
So thank you again for the question. I do agree. I was also actually a bit surprised by the fact that some faculties have different regulations, but also these regulations involve failing the students because of their absenteeism. This might be because of actual COVID-19, if they might have COVID-19, or this might be also because students don't want to go to the classes because they are already used to the online environment. This might be more convenient for them. So it's actually, I can see the both sides for the university board, how to make the regulations for the absenteeism nowadays. But I think it's important to, allow students, if they are really sick, if they have COVID-19, maybe they also might experience long COVID-19. So it's important to give them an opportunity to get their education still at this.
Could you relate this also to the mental health and well-being of students, the impact being absent towards meeting each other again?
In terms of nowadays or during the pandemic?
Yeah, what are the lessons learned from the pandemic which still transfer to nowadays regarding the mental health aspect of being present or absent?
Yeah, during the pandemic, we learned that these regulations has a strong influence on students' well-being. Also the loneliness, because we saw that loneliness increase, and this is the hot topic now, maybe even new epidemic, we can say so. So it is also important for universities, because they are also responsible of students. It is important to focus on these two aspects, like well-being, also loneliness of students, and provide extra support. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, and good luck with the further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Lamboy, researcher at Institute for Public Health and the Environment, and he's also associate professor at Erasmus University at the Institute for Health and Policy Management. Dr. Lamboy.
I would like to start with congratulating you with your nice work, with your completion of your book, and I also would like to extend my congratulations to your team. And then I would like to focus with you on chapter 2, where you study compliance to a number of behaviors. And you found that students sometimes find it hard to comply with the rules. And one of the specific findings in where you focus on keeping 1.5 meters distance, but also you include isolation. And specifically, these types of behavior involve at least 2 people. You can only keep a distance from another person. And so also with isolation, you need to isolate yourself from others. Yet, the theoretical framework that you use is psychological. It focuses on beliefs and attitudes, on risk perception, on one individual wanting to comply to rules. Looking back at it and finding the results that you have found, would you still start with a focus on the theoretical frameworks and looking for individual drivers for behaviors, or would you start to look a bit broader?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliments and the question. I would like to take a sip. For the theories we use, it was a theory of planned behavior, also protection motivation theory, and we saw that these are widely used theories in different settings. Also for this one, I think it was the useful theory in terms of the psychological mechanisms, but I do agree that especially keeping distance involves others, not an individual behavior. So other theories, also we saw in different studies that there are multiple theories that studies use. I do agree that different theories can be used in these studies to find maybe additional factors that influence students' behavior, especially the distancing behavior, also maybe the effect on the loneliness or the well-being of students. So I do agree with that.
And then in your chapter 2, you have this striking quote where a student says, it is easy to keep your distance at the Maastricht University, and it is really hard to keep your distance at the supermarket. And I thought, this is interesting, because then you have 2 different situations with 2 different contexts, and you could start to think, well, what are the differences between these 2 places that could help me trying to understand why and when it is easier or harder? I have a number of ideas that could come up with that. Could you please reflect on this? What would your line of thought be after this observation involving the importance of the context in these behaviors?
Thank you again for the question. For the different contexts, two different contexts, for the Maastricht University, also students mentioned that the regulations were well organized because there were so many reminders for students to remember that they need to keep this. It was very difficult to actually do not keep distance because the tables were separated, like they could not sit closer in like 1 meter distance, or there were like lines that they need to follow. Also the separating the roads to prevent the overflow of the students or the employees in general. And for the supermarket, it's different because there were less reminders, I would say so. So it was difficult to keep distance because in university, the others were also keeping distance because of these reminders. Also, in addition to that, we had stewards, also the crowd control people, who were making sure that students keep distance in the university. So they were helping them to keep distance. So these were the factors that help them to adhere to this regulation.
So therefore, we would agree that the next time you would also try to use, or we were in this together, would try to use the theoretical approaches, which also include the context, ease of compliance with the rules, but also reinforcement and the other types of drivers of behaviors. Thank you. I believe I have some more time. Then, in line with my colleague from the Public Health Institute, I would also ask you to reflect on another outcome measure, because you did even 2 implementation studies, and the other was on vaccination, willingness to vaccinate in chapter 5. And also here you, because of the time pressure, decided to skip your evaluation plan. There simply wasn't time, the urgency was somewhere else. I agree with that completely. But it's left behind, and we have time to evaluate now. What would your evaluation plan look like, and more specifically, what kind of outcome or output measures would you try to measure now in retrospect?
Thank you for the question again. And for the, I will go back to intervention mapping, because evaluation plan actually starts at the first step or the second step, because you start with the problematic behavior and then you move to the change. So what do you want to change with the behavior, or the determinants, or the beliefs. So these are actually the components for the evaluation plan. So when we say evaluation, it's like process and effect evaluation. For the effect evaluation, the logic models we develop in step 2 and also step 3, these are the parts for the evaluation, or the components of the evaluation plan that we would do if we had opportunity. For the process evaluation, it might be the talking to the participants, so who receive this program. Also talking to the implementers who actually implemented this program, to see if they have positive attitudes, or if there are needs to be improved in the program implementation or the content of the program. So the vaccination information that we included in the videos, or the vaccination webpage, whether it was easy to access, or whether it was it had enough information for students to make this vaccination decision. So these are the components that we would look at.
Thank you very much. Then I'm out of time, and I give the word back to the chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The opposition will be continued by Professor De Rijk, Professor of Work and Health, specializing in reintegration into work at Maastricht University.
Thank you. Dear candidates, also from my side, congratulations with your PhD thesis that you delivered, I think not just in time, but actually very fast. And I would also like to congratulate your team. I read your thesis with pleasure, and it will not come with a surprise that my questions will be about chapter 6, in which you studied the employee perspective. I was particularly pleased that you took this employee perspective on getting back to work. But I still have some unanswered questions after reading this chapter and the general discussion also about this chapter. First, you distinguish between those working in teaching and research, those in academic support, policy and management, and others. And since the previous chapters were addressing students, and since exposure in offices and during teaching on campus are very different, I would have expected that you would have distinguished staff that is teaching from staff that is only doing research. Have you considered this?
Can I clarify the question? So looking at both teaching staff and then the research staff.
Yeah, that you singled out, that you focused especially on the teaching staff.
Yeah, I think that would be a nice approach because, so actually there are two things. For the teaching staff, it's true that the teaching staff actually spend more time with students because they go to the tutorials and then they have to sit with at least 10 students, so they have higher risk to get the COVID-19, the coronavirus. But for the research stuff, so when we say research, sometimes they also do get involved in the teaching. So the academic part.
Yeah, but all that are involved in teaching versus those who are not scientific personnel that's not involved in teaching at all.
Yeah, that would be actually a nice approach to differentiate these two groups, because I do believe that, or I can imagine that these teaching staff might have higher risk from catching the COVID-19, so they might have more worries. Yeah, I do agree that it would be a nice extra study.
Yeah, for further analysis of your data, for example. I would be interested in that and outcomes also. Second, you conclude that the majority regarded Maastricht University a safe place to return to work. But it was only a very small majority. It was a majority. I don't disagree with that. About 40% did not regard Maastricht University a safe place to return to work. And on page 115, the substantial worries are being expressed. And I even expect that among the teaching staff, the percentage of those regarding the university not a safe place would have been higher. So it seems that you neglected the large amount of disagreements. Is that right?
So if we would have differentiate both teaching and research staff, I would think that we might have more worries. But I think we look at the whole staff picture, and then from that we identified certain worries that that needed to be addressed while preparing for the new academic year. But it's also important to mention that we also were critical to open the university immediately in September 2021, because it was, I think, risky to do that. But as it happens that research or practice or the policies, there is a discrepancy or gap, like intention and behavior gap. So because of the government decided that it's possible to open the universities, the university board will also follow this decision. So we were actually informed the university board it's risky to open up the university immediately, because there are actually, although 60% thinks that it is safe, there are actually 40% of personnel who feels unsafe to return to university. So we actually informed the university board to be more critical about this issue.
Yeah. So in fact, you have been critical about that in your advice. Well, finally, some of my colleagues already asked you about evaluation and effects, and I was thinking about those persons who developed long COVID when you have for more than three months. That can be extremely invalidating, as it turns out right now. And at least in the discussion, I missed some discussion on exposure in the workplace and the number of employees that got long COVID. That figure would have been also an interesting indicator, as we are now collecting more figures in different populations about long COVID, for the success of the Maastricht University policy. So what do you think of long COVID as an indicator for the effectiveness of the policy for the employees, at least?
Yeah, I do agree that long COVID is a very important issue. Also, there is a knowledge gap to learn more about long COVID now, and for the policy-wise, it was that they who have medical issues, it's also long COVID, they were referred to the medical doctor of the university. So we did not really differentiate that, but it was a policy from the university that if they have a medical health issue, so they will refer back to the medical doctor. Also, they can contact their line manager to discuss the possibilities for their work, also the work environment. So this was one of the plans.
Yeah. And did you collect any data on long COVID or?
No, we did not collect. Our last study was in June 2021, so we couldn't really collect data on long COVID.
Yeah, well, at that time
there was still, we could have done that, but we did not really.
Okay, but you agree that it might be one indication?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I give my word back to the project.
Thank you very much. And the opposition will be continued by Professor Kok, Emeritus Professor of Applied Psychology at Maastricht University.
Thank you. Let me start by congratulating you with your work. That's not a surprise, of course, but nevertheless, that's a good start. I'm interested in the future. And of course, looking back, a lot of things could have been different. I still think that most of the work that you did was fine, almost excellent sometimes. Nevertheless, if something like this happens again, and again we are actually not really prepared. There is no time to do determinant studies, whatever, experiments, because then half the population already died, something like that. So that's the issue. If you look back, everything could have been better, of course, but if you look back and think about the next situation that would be comparable, what would you do differently?
So, hi, esteemed opponent. Thank you for your compliments and for the questions. So I think, I'm speaking for the university, not for the whole society, because it's a whole different story. For the university, I think we really need to have crisis teams, that we need to immediately establish them already, because when the time came, when we have a new disaster, it might be time consuming to find the experts and then also build the trust within the expertise group. It might take time. So therefore we actually need to establish crisis teams for specific topics, because since I arrived to Maastricht University, which was in August 2019, we had actually 3 crises. One was a cyber crisis, the other one was we had a flood in Maastricht. So this also needed to provide timely response to students, because some students were homeless at that time due to this crisis, and we now experience pandemic. So we have all this expertise within the university, so why not we use this expertise to actually prepare for the next crisis. Therefore, I do think we need to have these specific teams and then focus on these specific areas. This might be the first one. Also, we need more resources. When we conducted these studies, we only did this within this time frame because this was all. I mean, we didn't have more people. If we had more people, probably we would have more studies. We would have focused on maybe whether students agree with the guidelines, so whether they want to have specific guidelines within the university. So, for instance, our IBM group had multiple discrete choice experiments to understand the public's engagement with the guidelines. So, which specific guideline packages are acceptable for specific groups. So, we would also have done that. Probably this is a better tailored approach to have it. So, another one, we also need to learn our lessons. And we need to really, as a university, reflect on the pandemic and how we approach it, what can be improved, what will be the next steps for the pandemic. And we need to plan, to have an emergency plan, and then we need to revise this regularly, I would say so, because time is changing, everything is changing. We saw that in the past 2 years that it's very unpredictable. So we need to have a protocol to follow through when we have a new crisis, I would say so. Yeah, these are the things that come to my mind.
Well, that's a very clear idea, and that means that part of that should already have happened. Mm-hmm. Did you notice that it happened?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if we have already reflected on the lessons learned as a university, or we already established multiple crisis teams, or we employed or we built these networks when we need to deal with a crisis.
But now you are a social psychologist. Mm-hmm. If you look back at what you just created, this wonderful system, mm-hmm. Do you think it will happen?
What will happen?
Do you think that really the university will put in place a potential approach year after year when there is no epidemic?
That's a good question, I think, again. I think we kind of learn our lessons, although we did not reflect on them. So I think they can be more proactive when we have a new epidemic. Although I'm not sure if we have like 10 years without any crisis and then immediately a new crisis pop up, then we would be either surprised or don't know what to do, or we already have the plans to work on because we already learned our lessons. What we saw in the MPAX crisis, since it happened immediately or during COVID-19 pandemic, we already know what to do, so it was easy to approach. Also tell people that distancing is important, so they already knew this behavior. So we learned, but we need to remember in the next pandemic or crisis.
I hope you're right. Then that's maybe a sensitive issue. In the study among students on vaccination, actually the good news was that only a small percentage was anti-vaccination. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, that the students who were anti-vaccination, the main issue was, you also asked them to what kind of information they would like and from whom. And they wanted scientific information from medical experts that were not paid by the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah. So what we also learned from this pandemic, trust is a big issue also for the in the government, also for the university. They want to have a trustful information from trusted authorities. This can be medical doctor, this can be scientists. So they want to have a trustworthy information, also transparency, because also what we learned from students, they wanted to have a transparency in the informational communication. So wanted the university board to have a timely, also transparent communication for what is happening and for the future plans.
Very tactful answer. Yes, thank you.
Tuğçe Varol, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I requested you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the line, I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Make the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. South side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
moet gaan zitten en dan kan de rest namelijk.
Is het zo?
Dat is het idee. Zij moeten wachten tot wij zitten.
Nou, ik dacht dat ze altijd...
Dat geloof ik, niemand weet dat.
Oké. Tuğçe Varol, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Ruiter is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Please all rise.
Dear candidate, do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
Thank you. By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Tuğçe Varol, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with a degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee and affixed with the official seal of the university.
All right, dear Dr. Varol. First, of course, I would like to congratulate you with this impressive milestone, not only from me, but the entire supervisory team. So, in this adventure that we called your PhD, you basically jumped on a very, very fast-moving train. So you faced an impossible job. You did not only survive this crazy journey, but you succeeded in the job. Because your entire PhD was a very, very fast-moving train. Every time we blinked with our eyes, the COVID situation changed, and it was your job to be on top of it, to improvise, to work as efficiently as possible without losing any scientific rigor. And I think we can all agree that you managed, so my compliments for that. And now we're here. So you received this doctorate, and now it's time to stop running for a moment. So it's basically time for you to jump off this very, very fast-moving train and time to listen to this Laudatio. Because, of course, you can later on jump on that very fast-moving Tuğçe Express again, but for now, just take a moment to relax and listen, because there's nothing you can do about these few minutes. So for this Laudatio, in which I will try to sum up your achievements, I basically had 3 ideas, and I want to share those 3 ideas with you. So let's start with my first idea. So the first idea was to follow your suggestion and let ChatGPT write this Laudatio for me. And for those who don't know, ChatGPT is one of those AI tools that Tuğçe introduced me to. And for a good 3 minutes, I tried to do this. And I really, really soon realized that this Laudatio was way too good for me to be, to be written by me. It was immediately clear that it was written by a computer, so I decided to not use this Laudatio, but just steal some phrases from ChatGPT that I thought that were applicable in your case. So therefore I quote, "It was a privilege for me to cross your path, and your unwavering commitment to your craft has led you to achieve remarkable feats, pushing the boundaries of what was once thought possible. Beyond your professional accomplishment, you, as extraordinary individual, remain grounded and humble, never forgetting your roots and always acknowledging the support of your loved ones." It sounds like me, right? Well, although I definitely agree with those words, with those computer-generated compliments, I assume that it's quite boring to listen to me paraphrasing those well-meant superlatives for the next 5 minutes. So therefore, for about 1 second, I decided to work on my second idea for this Laudatio. And that was in which I tell all kind of semi-funny stories about you. So for that, I started to list all the 834 moments in which I said to you, Tuğçe, you are a terrible person. Yeah, because I said this a lot to you. You might remember some of those. So for instance, when you tried to convince me of you're right, well, I thought you were wrong. Or those moments when I said no, I think for a good reason, and you did them anyway. Or when I heard that you decided to start another extra project, well, I thought your PhD was already challenging enough. So yeah, I can continue with discussing all those moments in which I thought you were terrible, but I realized also here again that listening to a summary of 800 plus moments in which I called you terrible might become boring after the first, I think, 300 or so. So I guess I should not continue with the second idea as well. So let's go to the second page. So for this Laudatio, I only had my third idea left. And this idea was to shortly reflect on the past 4 years. So for that, let's go back to the 18th of October in 2019, where I received a first email from you, asking whether I was willing to become your master thesis supervisor. So not PhD, your master thesis supervisor. And back then I received many of those requests, but yours stood out because you did not only send me an email, but you added a summary of 14 different research topics that you were willing to work on. 14. So this should have been a first warning for me, as you immediately showed that you were a person with many interests, many ideas, and a lot of enthusiasm. So in our first meeting after that email, I met a humble, silent, very polite student with too many ideas. So we discussed some sort of direction for your thesis, and I sent you home with some homework, mostly to structure your thought and to get some more directions. And warning sign number 2 immediately popped up for me the exact same day in which you sent me another email. And in this email, you explained that you did not only make some notes based on a meeting, but that you also rearranged them to make them more logical, and that you added some other things that came to your mind after the lecture that I gave that day. And of course, the email was immediately accompanied by a 3-page attachment with thesis ideas, suggestions on how to execute those ideas, and a list of references that I could read, of course, only if I could find the time before the next meeting. So this continued for a few months, and after which you did not only did one study, like everyone else, you did 2. You published your thesis in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. It's also not something that every master student does, and expressed to me that you wanted to start a PhD afterwards. And for quite some time, the COVID-19 pandemic started, we managed to continue working on this high pace, which in hindsight was quite relaxed. Actually, your master was quite relaxed. And this became very clear after the 12th of August, only 10 months later after our first contact. Because that day I sent a message to the rest of this team of superstars on this side, in which I introduced you as a clever, systematic, fast and flexible person that we needed for the research that now led to your PhD thesis. And where you were already fast and enthusiastic during your master's internship, you and I think all of us now had to become super fast and efficient. So each email that was sent around by one of us was answered within 5 minutes. And you very committedly were working 24/7, even when we told you to relax a bit. And before we knew, we were a few years later, the need for COVID-19 research was reduced. You had enough publication for a PhD, and you secured 5 or 6 other additional projects that you are still working on. So additionally, you also managed to secure your next adventure in Utrecht, where you will work as a postdoc on public engagement and climate change. So again, a very interesting new start, and I'm sure you will do great there. So that was my third idea, and I think that quite well describes you. So I wanted to conclude this Laudatio with just one thing that I want to say 2 more times. So that one thing that I would like to say is, Tuğçe, you are terrible. And because you are terrible, I like to quote my friend ChatGPT again. So at the reception directly after this session, let us raise our glass and toast to Tuğçe, whose passion, talent and unwavering spirit have set her apart as a true inspiration. May your future endeavors continue to shine brightly, and may your legacy serve as a guiding light for all those who strive for greatness. So Tuğçe, and I say it here for the very, very last time now, you are terrible, but please stay terrible because terrible suits you.
Dear Dr. Varol, also on behalf of Maastricht University and on behalf of the Faculty of Psychology and Neuroscience, I congratulate you wholeheartedly with the degree you acquired today. And before I close this meeting, I will briefly mention that there's a reception in the Refter here around the corner. And before we, the Corona, and your team go there are two picture moments, one here in the middle and one on the stairs. I saw at least one photographer, but I invite the photographers to benefit of that. And so hereby I close this academic session.
You do that because for the comments and then